There are over 400,000 varieties of rice in the world. Rice feeds more than half the human population on Earth, but most Americans know maybe 3 of them, and are probably using the wrong one for whatever they're cooking right now. Jasmine rice. Every year there's a competition called the World's Best Rice Contest. Countries submit their finest rice. A panel of experts evaluates aroma, texture, appearance, and taste, and a winner is announced. Thailand has won that contest 13 times since 2009. The rice they keep winning with is jasmine rice. In Thai, jasmine rice is called hom mali, which translates roughly to fragrant rice. The name isn't marketing. The fragrance is real and comes from a natural compound found in the grain itself, the same compound found in pandan leaves, which is why jasmine rice and pandan show up together constantly in Southeast Asian cooking. The 2 things smell like each other because they're producing the same thing. Jasmine rice grows primarily in northeastern Thailand, which has the specific combination of soil, heat, and rainfall that produces the highest quality grain. As of 2018, Thailand controlled 60% of global jasmine rice production. Vietnam had 23%. Cambodia had 8%. That's essentially the entire world supply split between 3 countries. The grain itself sits between long-grain white rice and sushi rice in terms of length and stickiness. It's softer and slightly more cohesive than standard long-grain white rice, which makes it better at holding together when you eat it with a spoon or fork, but not so sticky that it clumps like sushi rice. That balance is why it works so well with Thai curry, Chinese fried rice, and grilled meat. It absorbs the sauce without falling apart or becoming a paste. If you're eating at a Thai, Vietnamese, or Cambodian restaurant in America, you're almost certainly eating jasmine rice whether you know it or not. It's the default grain for most of Southeast Asia, and the one that keeps beating everyone else at the only competition that matters. White rice. Rice was first domesticated near the Yangtze River in China, approximately 10,000 years ago. From there, it spread across Asia, then to the Middle East, Europe, and the Americas. Today, it is the staple food for more than half the global population. China alone consumes about 150 million metric tons of rice per year, more than any other country on Earth. White rice is what you get when you take a rice grain and mill away the outer bran layer and the germ, leaving only the starchy white interior. The process makes the grain easier to digest, extends its shelf life, and makes it cook faster. It became the standard form of rice across much of Asia, starting in the 19th century, when milling technology became widely available. The problem was that the bran layer contains vitamin B1. When populations shifted from unmilled to milled white rice as their primary food source, they lost that vitamin from their diets. The result was a disease called beriberi, weakness, nerve damage, heart failure. It swept through Japan, China, Southeast Asia, and among sailors and soldiers in the late 1800s and early 1900s in numbers that were catastrophic. It took decades to understand that the food people had been eating for thousands of years, now stripped of one layer, was the cause. The gap in rice consumption between countries is significant. The average American eats about 4.4 pounds of rice per year. The average Japanese person eats around 130 pounds. The average person in Bangladesh eats approximately 400 pounds, nearly a pound a day, every day, for a lifetime. White long-grain rice is bland by design. It's a platform for whatever is being served with it. That neutrality is exactly what makes it useful. It doesn't compete with the food it's under. Basmati rice. The name basmati comes from Sanskrit. Bas means fragrance. Mati means full of. The full translation is something like full of fragrance, though it's often rendered as queen of fragrance. That name has been attached to this rice for a very long time. The earliest known written mention of basmati appears in a Punjabi epic poem called Heer Ranjha, written by the poet Waris Shah in 1766. For a rice variety to be named in a poem, it had to have been well known for decades before that. Historians estimate basmati was being grown and traded around 1700, meaning this grain has a documented history of at least 325 years, and likely much longer. Authentic basmati rice is a protected product. Under geographical indication status, the same legal framework that prevents California sparkling wine from being called champagne, only rice grown in specific districts of India and Pakistan can legally be called basmati. The foothills of the Himalayas, the Punjab plains, specific river valleys, the same rice grown anywhere else is a hybrid, a cousin, a look-alike, not basmati. After harvest, basmati rice has to be aged before it reaches the market. The minimum aging period is 12 months. Premium brands age their rice for 18 to 24 months. During aging, the grain dries out, the aroma compounds develop, and the texture firms up. A fresh harvested basmati and a properly aged one cook and taste noticeably differently. When basmati is cooked, it elongates. The grain stretches lengthwise, rather than puffing outward like other rices. A raw grain that's 6 or 7 millimeters long can become 15 to 18 millimeters after cooking. It stays separate and fluffy, which is the defining quality that makes it work in biryani, pulao, and rice pilaf. In 2005, the UK Food Standards Agency tested basmati sold across the country. They found that roughly half of all basmati on British shelves had been adulterated, mixed with cheaper long-grain rice varieties. Some samples contained no genuine basmati at all. The package said basmati. The rice inside wasn't. Sushi rice. Sushi did not begin with raw fish on rice. The original form of sushi, called narezushi, was a method of preserving fish by packing it in salted rice and letting it ferment for months, sometimes years. The rice was a preservation tool. The fermentation acid kept the fish from spoiling. When the fish was ready to eat, the rice was discarded. Nobody ate the rice. This method was practiced for centuries. At some point, cooks started eating the rice alongside the fish before the fermentation was complete. The rice went from packaging material to food, but it still took several more centuries before sushi evolved into the form most people recognize today. Edo-mai sushi, the style that became the foundation for modern sushi, appeared in the early 1800s in Edo, the city now called Tokyo. It was street food. Stalls on riverbanks and near docks served hand-pressed rice, topped with fresh seafood, to be eaten standing up. Fast, cheap, popular. Closer to a hot dog cart than a restaurant. The California roll was created in Los Angeles in the 1970s by a Japanese chef named Hidekazu Tojo. American diners at the time were reluctant to eat raw fish. Tojo replaced it with cooked crab and added avocado, hiding the seaweed inside the roll rather than on the outside. The result was sushi that Americans would actually order. It spread from LA across the country and eventually back to Japan, where it's now widely available. The rice itself, short-grain Japanese rice, cooked and then seasoned with rice vinegar, sugar, and salt, is what makes sushi structurally possible. It has to be washed thoroughly before cooking. Skip the washing, and too much surface starch remains on the grains, which makes the rice gummy and impossible to work with. The seasoning gives it the slightly tangy, faintly sweet flavor that balances the fish. Arborio rice. Arborio is named after a town in the Piedmont region of northwestern Italy. It grows primarily in the Po Valley, a broad agricultural plain that produces about 35% of Italy's total agricultural output, running between the Alps and the Apennines through cities like Milan, Turin, and Bologna. The grain is short, plump, and white, with a chalky, opaque center. It has an unusually high starch content, concentrated on the outside of each grain. That surface starch is the entire point of arborio rice, and the reason the one rule about cooking it is non-negotiable. Never rinse arborio rice before making risotto. Rinsing removes that surface starch. The starch is what creates the creamy consistency risotto is known for. Without it, you have wet rice in broth, not risotto. The texture that makes the dish is built from what gets released as the rice cooks, and washing it away before you start means you can't get it back. Risotto is made by adding warm broth to arborio rice, a ladleful at a time, stirring constantly, and waiting for each addition to be absorbed before adding the next. Done correctly, it takes 25 to 30 minutes of standing at the stove and not walking away. The starch releases gradually into the liquid, creating a sauce around each grain. The inside of the grain stays slightly firm, what Italians call al dente. The outside becomes creamy without any cream being added. Arancini are what happens to leftover risotto. The cold rice is formed into balls, stuffed with meat sauce and mozzarella, coated in breadcrumbs, and deep fried until golden. One of the best applications of leftover food in any cuisine, a dish that exists only because arborio rice holds together well enough when cold to be shaped and fried without falling apart. If you've made risotto and it turned out watery and flat, the most likely cause is one of two things. You rinsed the rice, or you added all the broth at once. If you've made it this far, comment which rice you haven't tried yet. And if this video has been useful, subscribe. There are 5 more coming, including the one that was banned for centuries, the one that's technically not rice at all, and the one that a country of 7 million people eats every single day as their main grain, bomba rice. In the 14th and 15th centuries, rice farmers working the fields around Valencia, on Spain's eastern Mediterranean coast, needed to eat lunch. They had what was around them: rice, snails, green beans, whatever game they could catch. They built a fire, cooked everything together in a wide, shallow iron pan, and ate directly from it with wooden spoons. That dish, cooked by laborers in a field, is what eventually became paella. Rice has been grown in Valencia since the 8th century, when Moorish farmers built the irrigation canals that still run through the region. The particular variety they developed over centuries for this specific landscape is bomba, a short, round, dense grain grown in the wetlands surrounding the Albufera Lagoon just south of the city. Bomba rice absorbs up to 3 times its own volume in liquid. That's an extraordinary absorption capacity, more than almost any other rice on earth. It soaks up broth, saffron, seafood, meat, and aromatics, pulling all of those flavors into every grain. And despite absorbing that much liquid, it doesn't become soft or mushy. The grains stay separate and slightly firm. The bottom of the paella pan, if the heat and timing are right, develops a thin, crispy layer of toasted rice called socarrat. It's the part people who know paella actually want. Not the top, not the middle, the bottom, where the rice made direct contact with the pan and caramelized slightly from the heat. Achieving socarrat requires the right rice, the right pan, the right temperature, and not stirring once the rice is spread in the pan. Bomba handles all of those conditions better than any substitute. Bomba takes 30% longer to mature in the field than other rice varieties, and it produces lower yields per acre. That's why it's more expensive. A bag of bomba on an American shelf came from Spain. It's not grown commercially in the US. Every grain in that bag represents a crop that took extra time, extra care, and produced less than a faster variety would have. Black rice. During the Song and Tang dynasties in China, roughly around 900 CE, black rice was reserved exclusively for the emperor. The belief was that it promoted longevity and health, and it was consumed by the royal court as a kind of medicinal food. Common people were forbidden from eating it. That prohibition is where the name forbidden rice comes from. The more practical reason for its scarcity was yield. Black rice produces far less grain per plant than white rice varieties. When supply is extremely limited, the people in power take it. The emperor ate it not only because he believed it extended his life, but because there wasn't enough of it for anyone else. The color comes from anthocyanins, the same plant pigments that make blueberries blue and blackberries dark. When black rice is cooked, it turns a deep purple. The water in the pot turns purple. Whatever else is in the pot turns slightly purple. It's not a subtle grain. In 1993, two Americans named Ken and Carol Burns were traveling through China and stopped for a meal at a small village restaurant. They were served black rice and were immediately struck by both the flavor, nutty, slightly sweet, with an almost meaty depth, and the color. They went to the market to buy some and learned about its history. They came back to the United States, named it Forbidden Rice, and began selling it through a company called Lotus Foods. That was the first time this rice was widely available to American consumers. The forbidden designation had faded in China centuries earlier, but the name stuck in the American market, and Lotus Foods still sells it under that name today. Black rice is now in grocery stores across the country, something that would have been genuinely impossible for most people in Imperial China to access. Brown rice. Brown rice is not a different variety of rice. It's the same grain as white rice. Specifically, it's white rice before the outer layers are removed. The milling process that creates white rice strips away the bran and the germ. What's left is brown rice, with those layers still attached. The bran layer is where most of the fiber, vitamin B, and minerals are concentrated. Leaving it on makes the grain more nutritious. It also makes it harder, slower to cook, and more prone to going rancid. The oils in the bran break down faster than the pure starch of white rice. Brown rice takes 45 to 50 minutes to cook. White rice takes 15 to 20. Brown rice has a shelf life of around 6 months. White rice, stored properly, can last years. The health food movement in the United States picked up brown rice as a symbol in the 1970s, when a broader shift toward whole, unprocessed foods was reshaping how Americans thought about eating. Brown rice became shorthand for eating better. It stayed in that position since then, the version of rice that signals you're being intentional about your food choices. Whether that nutritional difference matters meaningfully depends on your overall diet. If rice is one component of a varied diet with plenty of other fiber sources, the difference between brown and white is minimal. If rice is the primary staple, as it is for hundreds of millions of people in Asia, that difference becomes more significant. The gap in annual rice consumption between the United States and rice-dependent countries is enormous. Americans eat about 4.4 pounds of rice per person per year. People in Bangladesh eat close to 400 pounds. For most of the world, the question of white versus brown isn't a wellness decision. It's just rice. Wild rice. Wild rice is not rice. This is not a technicality. Wild rice, Zizania palustris, is the seed of an aquatic grass that grows in the shallow lakes and slow-moving streams of the Great Lakes region in North America. It has no close botanical relationship to the rice plant. European settlers called it wild rice because they saw indigenous people harvesting it from the water, and the scene reminded them of rice paddies. The name stuck and has caused confusion ever since. It is the only cereal grain native to North America. Seeds have been found in archaeological layers dated to 12,000 years ago. It has been growing in these lakes for longer than most things on this continent have had names. For the Ojibwe people, this grain is called manumin, meaning the good berry. It is not simply food. It is a sacred element of Ojibwe spiritual life, present in their origin story, their ceremonies, and their understanding of their relationship with the land. According to that story, the Ojibwe were told by their creator, Gichi Manidu, to migrate westward until they found the food that grows on water. Manumin was that food. The migration to reach it shaped the geography of the entire Great Lakes region. The Menominee people take their name from this plant. Multiple tribal nations fought over access to wild rice territories for more than a century. The Sioux and Ojibwe battled specifically over the rich rice waters of northern Wisconsin. This was not a symbolic conflict. Control of the wild rice harvest meant the difference between a community surviving winter or not. In Minnesota, you need a license to harvest wild rice. The law also requires that it be harvested the traditional way, from a canoe, using 2 wooden sticks to knock the ripe grains into the bottom of the boat. Combine harvesters and mechanized operations are not permitted for wild harvest. Minnesota is the only state in the U.S. that has maintained this legal protection. Most wild rice sold in American grocery stores is not actually wild. In 1950, the first commercial paddy operation for wild rice opened in Minnesota. Today, cultivated wild rice is grown in paddies in Minnesota, Wisconsin, California, and other states. People who live near the Great Lakes refer to this as paddy rice to distinguish it from the real thing, which is still hand-harvested by Ojibwe families each August and September. Glutinous rice. The name is misleading. Glutinous rice does not contain gluten. Glutinous, in this context, means glue-like, describing the texture, not the chemistry. Glutinous rice, sticky rice, and sweet rice are all names for the same thing, and none of them mean it contains the protein that affects people with celiac disease. What makes it sticky is the starch composition. Regular rice contains a mixture of two types of starch. Glutinous rice contains almost entirely one type, the one that becomes extremely adhesive when cooked. The result is rice that sticks to itself, sticks to the bowl, sticks to whatever it touches. That quality is not a flaw. It's what makes it functional for the things it's used for. Sticky rice is not cooked like regular rice. It has to be soaked in cold water for a minimum of several hours, usually overnight. Then it's steamed, not boiled, typically in a bamboo basket set over simmering water. Cooking it in water the way you'd cook jasmine or basmati produces a gluey, waterlogged mass. The steaming method lets the starch cook properly while keeping the grains individual enough to handle. Laos is the only country in the world where sticky rice is the primary daily grain. Not jasmine rice, not long grain rice, sticky rice, eaten at nearly every meal, shaped into small balls by hand, and used to scoop up food from shared dishes. The Lao name for it is khao niu. It is the center of the cuisine, the center of the table, and an important part of Lao cultural identity. In Japan, a specific short-grain variety of glutinous rice, called mochigome, is used to make mochi. The traditional process, mochitsuki, involves steaming the rice and then pounding it repeatedly in a large wooden mortar, using heavy mallets until it becomes a smooth, elastic paste. The process takes two people, one to pound, one to turn, and fold the rice between strikes. It's performed as a ceremony called mochitsuki and is traditionally associated with the Japanese New Year, Zongzi in China, Ban Chung in Vietnam, the sticky rice layer at the base of Thai mango sticky rice, the coating on Hawaiian butter mochi. All of them are made from glutinous rice. It's the rice that holds things together, literally, across an enormous range of cultures and dishes. Every rice on this list comes from one species of plant, or in the case of wild rice, not even that. The 400,000 varieties that exist are the result of 10,000 years of farmers selecting, crossing, and adapting the same basic grain to different climates, different soils, different dishes. One rule covers most of the cooking decisions. Long grain means separate and fluffy, jasmine, basmati, long grain white. Short grain means sticky or creamy, sushi rice, arborio, glutinous. Use a short grain rice when you need things to hold together. Use a long grain rice when you need them to stay apart. Most mistakes in rice cooking come down to ignoring that distinction. Which of these 10 are you going to try first? Leave it in the comments. The most requested one becomes the next deep dive. And if you learned something in this video, subscribe. There's more where this came from.